Hey there, you're listening to the Girls Talking Life podcast, and I'm your host, Johanna. If you're like me, you love time with friends. I always leave feeling encouraged, inspired to try something different, or I've learned something new. So why not continue to grow even when we can't be with our girlfriends? We're not made to do life on our own. So in each episode of this show, I'll bring you a girl and her story to give you refreshing ideas to stir your soul. Let's walk this road together. Are you ready to talk life? Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you chose to spend some time here. If you like what you're hearing on Girls Talking Life, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Play. And then every other Monday when a new episode is released, it automatically updates for you and you don't have to go looking for it. You can also join the Girls Talking Life newsletter by signing up at girlstalkinglife.com. You'll get an email every time a new episode is released, giving you all the show notes, telling you about anything special that's happening here. Friends, do you compare yourself to other people? Do you add up all the best features of your friends and acquaintances and try to measure up? Without even realizing it, we can fall into a pattern of continual comparison that becomes exhausting. But it doesn't have to be that way. Richella Parham joins me today to boldly share her story about the comparison trap that she found herself in. Richella and I talk about when she first realized that this was a problem in her life. She talks about how she would see the best attributes of others, measure herself against them, and then berate herself when she didn't measure up. Richella tells us that when she went in search of help in this area, she really didn't find anything useful. So she began to do some research herself, and she ultimately wrote the book, Mythical Me, Finding Freedom from Constant Comparison. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Richella has some great insight and encouragement for all of us. Everything we talk about can be found in the show notes for today's episode on girlstalkinglife.com. Here is my conversation with Richella. Richella, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I am thrilled to be talking with you.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk with you, Johanna. Thank you for the invitation. It really means a lot to me.
I had the pleasure of meeting you this past fall at the Hope Writers Conference, and that was where I was introduced to your book. And since then, I've had the opportunity to read it, and it was just lovely.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll tell you what, an author at this stage lives for words like those.
Oh, well, it's true. It's very true. And I want to dive into the topic of your book, but first I would like you to just introduce yourself for the listeners.
I am, experienced. Let's put it that way. It's easy for me these days to sigh and think I'm old. Not really old, but yeah. I am a wife of coming up on my 35th wedding anniversary.
Wow, congratulations.
Right?
That's fantastic.
And when I was a girl, I thought of anyone who had been married more than 25 years as an old person. So that's why it's easy for me to think that I'm old. But I realize now, no, they weren't old. They were just a lot older. But yeah, almost 35 years. And my husband, Jack, and I have 3 young adult sons. So we are delighted to have just finished paying for our last child's college tuition. Our youngest graduated from college. Our middle son just finished graduate school and is working as an accountant. And our oldest son is actually a U.S. Navy officer. He's a naval aviator, and he just got married. So for the first time in my life, I have a daughter. As of last
how
June,
wonderful!
I have a daughter-in-law. It is wonderful. It is. We're so excited for. This is what we hope for all of our boys, that they'll find lovely women who will love them and whom they can love. And so 1 down, 2 to go in that department, but we're just really, really grateful to be at this point in our lives. We live in Durham, North Carolina, where we've been since 2002. So North Carolina really feels like home now. Just been mostly for the past 28 years, I have spent most of my time as a stay-at-home mom and have transitioned in the past 10 years or so into more and more work, and now excited to be splitting my time between being still the chief executive of this household. There's a lot to running a household, as you know.
Yes.
But also working as an author and speaker. So life is good. It has its challenges, but we're very grateful.
Thank you for that, Richella. And your new project here, your latest project, is this book, Mythical Me, Finding Freedom from Constant Comparison.
That's right. Latest big project. That's right.
Richella, why did you want to write a book on this topic? How did that all get started for you?
Oh, I wanted to write a book on this topic, not from want, but from need, because this is the book I desperately needed for many years. It's a pretty personal book. I actually share a good bit of my personal story, and I hesitated a little bit about whether I should write about something so personal, but I realized that maybe sharing my own struggle perhaps could help someone else with theirs. To say that I struggled with comparison is an understatement. I would say that constantly comparing myself to other people was one of the two or three biggest hurdles I had to overcome in my own emotional and spiritual life. This is a thing that had created the greatest impediments to me from personal growth, from relational growth, from spiritual growth. And when I looked for help with it, I was not, let's say, I was not satisfied with what I found. And by that, I simply mean that I was never able to find any advice that actually helped me. I read articles, I read books, I read devotionals, I listened to talks. And once I became aware that I was always comparing myself to others, I really wanted to get over it. And I was never able to find anything that actually helped me make any changes. I found lots of cheerleading, and sometimes that's really helpful, right? Just to hear someone say, you go, go, go. But my own problem was deeper, and I needed substance. So I started digging into it, and I feel like the Lord spoke to me in some ways that gave me some substance and changed my life. And after a while, I realized that if I had something substantive like that perhaps it would be good to write about it. But to be honest, I kind of had to be dragged kicking and screaming into writing. I'm not someone who had always dreamed of writing a book. I liked to write, and for years and years and years, I wrote regularly on a blog. But I'm not a person who always dreamed of being a writer. Once I decided to do it, I did it.
I feel like when we're being obedient, sometimes that's how it works.
Exactly.
We go kicking and screaming.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Oh.
It's not usually something we want to do.
Yeah.
So is this something that you've always known was a struggle for you, or was it something you realized one day?
I realized it one day only because it was pointed out to me. So to answer your question, no, I did not know I was doing it. It was, I shouldn't say that it was unconscious, but it was pretty close to an unconscious behavior. In fact, the name of the book, Mythical Me, is based on a conversation I had with my husband in which he kindly and lovingly, but very firmly pointed out to me that I was comparing myself often. I didn't know I was doing it, but we were having a conversation one day in which I was telling him about a very nice thing that happened to me. We had moved into a new house, and some friends who lived in our neighborhood invited me to go with them to a Bible study at a church across town. Very kind, 3 friends. And it was a wonderful Bible study. And the evening of the first time I went with them to that, I told my husband about the Bible study, but also about the trip across town with the 3 friends. And over the course of the conversation, I compared myself to each of those 3 women. Now, there were 3 lovely women, so they're the kind of people you'd compare yourself to, right? But I had no idea that I was comparing myself to each of them, and I did it all in this one conversation. And Jack finally stopped me and pointed out what I had done. And I was taken aback, honestly, when he first mentioned it. But he went on to explain that I would notice each person's most outstanding attribute, and then I would compare myself to that particular attribute. And upon reflection, I had to admit that this was true. But he said something, Johanna, that has stuck with me so clearly. He said to me, you have created for yourself a mythical composite woman made up of all those outstanding attributes. And that's who you think you're supposed to be.
Mm.
But she doesn't exist, he said. And I will have to admit, I was pretty defensive at first when he told me that.
That stings when someone points out something like that to you.
Yeah, because that was a very direct thing to say. And yet, as I thought about it, prayed about it, cried about it some, I realized he was true. This is exactly what I did. I'm a great people watcher. I'm an avid observer of people, but it's true. Whenever I would meet someone new or get to know someone better, I would always like to find out what was outstanding about them. I admire people. And then I would reflect upon how I wasn't as good a blank as they were. Or, I did it with all kinds of things. So I did it with talents. I did it with gifts. I did it with physical appearance. I did it with possessions, you name it. I compared what I possessed with what they possessed. And if you add up all the best of everyone you meet and you kind of glob that together into one person, I expected that I was supposed to be that one person. And so I was always coming up short.
As would anyone.
Yeah, but I don't know that I would ever have noticed it had there not been someone faithful to point it out to me. I might have gone on through my life continuing in that sort of constant insecurity if I hadn't had someone point out to me that I was doing this to myself. So I'm grateful.
Yeah, we all need people in our lives that'll step in and say something when it isn't easy.
Right, yeah.
I feel like this is something that all women will struggle with in some capacity at some point in their lives, comparing themselves to other people. And that all stems from different places. And you talk about where it stems from for you in your book. Do you mind talking a little bit about that now?
No, I don't mind at all. And I'll be very forthright and say that discovering where it comes from for me, it took a while. And I got myself into such a state of unease that dealing with this constant comparison led to real difficulties in my life. And I ended up needing the help of a professional. I ended up seeing a therapist to help me get to the bottom of it. So I'm grateful that I was able to peel away the layers and get to it. But it actually stems from something I've dealt with my whole life. I was born with a birth defect. I have a very rare disease. And the most, let's say, most significant symptom of the disease is a huge birthmark. Most of the right side of my body is covered with a port wine stain. And so from the time that I was tiny, from the time I started noticing the world around me, I always looked at other people and saw that I was different, that I looked different. And it's not to say that I had an unhappy childhood or that I never did anything or that I shriveled up into a ball. No, not at all. But I always had the sense that I didn't fit in, that I wasn't like other people. And it really, over the years, impacted me in ways that were at times minor, but were just in general really deep. And I hadn't ever quite confronted. It wasn't as though I realized when I was 12 years old that I was constantly doing this and said, boy, I need to address this. No, it was always happening at these deep subterranean levels. And I didn't realize the impact it was having on me. But since then, I've talked with a lot of people who have told me that one thing or another has made them feel very much the same way. And I've come to realize that a lot of us have something about which we're self-conscious, or something that makes us feel insecure, or as though we're not enough, or as though we don't fit in. Not everyone has something dramatic like a huge birthmark, but a lot of us have something, some little thing that marks us and sets us apart, at least in our own minds. Getting to the bottom of that, I think, is a really important thing, being able to, it's not easy. It isn't easy to go back and address the thing that you realize made you feel that way. But I think it's part of getting to the bottom of it, that you have to actually address some things. And, for my case, it took some professional help and actually took a lot of time. It's not as though one day I thought, oh, this all stems from my birthmark. Well, what do you know now? What shall I cook for dinner?
Right.
It was a process. Yeah, it did stem from that one thing and built from there.
So the act of comparison all by itself is exhausting. And you say that it also causes you to believe things that aren't true. Things that aren't true about yourself, about God, and about others. Can you speak to that?
Well, that's the way it worked in my case, for sure. Because comparison, I truly believe, distorts the way we see things. So it's not as though comparison only has one effect. Rather, comparison affects the way we see. So for instance, it would be like wearing a pair of glasses that are the wrong prescription. Then everything you look at is just a little off. So comparison, I truly believe, stems from insecurity. And so it impacts the way we see ourselves. And then we take the way we see ourselves and we project that on to the things around us. So for instance, we are in relationship with God. But if we start from a place of a distorted way of looking at ourselves, then it can be difficult to pursue a relationship with God. In my case, I assumed that I thought I knew all about God. And I believed that perfection was God's standard. And I knew that I didn't meet that standard in any way, shape, or form, not just because of my sin, but because of my construction. And so I, without meaning to, projected onto God that God must be angry with me, or at least disappointed in me. And then I also projected onto the people around me because I couldn't see myself clearly and was unable to see myself as lovable and valuable. I doubted that anyone really loved and valued me. And so it's a distorted picture of everything we look at because we start from a place of not being able to see clearly. And you can imagine why that led to some relational difficulties in my life, why I ended up needing the help of a professional. But that's exactly what happened for me. And I think it's not as uncommon as I would like for it to believe. I've talked with so many women and men who are unable to see themselves as lovable and valuable and loved and valued. And yet I think it's an irreducible human need, the need to be loved. It's what we're all longing for. We want to be loved and accepted. And yet we end up clamoring for it, unsure that we have it because we're not able to see clearly.
And when your view is distorted, that affects every area of your life.
It does. Yep.
Yeah. So how do we go about clearing that vision up?
That is a good question. and that's really the subject of the book. I think it starts with learning more about the truth, not as we already understand it, but the truth as God presents it. And being able to say, okay, I'm not sure that I'm seeing clearly, so let me look at things differently. And the bulk of my book really is devoted to learning from what God says, what is some of the truth about God, and what is some of the truth about ourselves, and what is some of the truth about other people. And trying to look at that using the Bible as the primary textbook, but then also using some of the truths that have been presented by Christ's followers through the ages. And recognizing that there might be lacks in understanding. There might be holes in our understanding. For instance, I had never really deeply considered the fact that God himself is a relationship of three eternal persons. God himself is a relationship, and God made us in his image. We're made in the image of a being who's actually an eternal relationship. And so I now believe that we were created for relationship.
Absolutely.
So I love, Johanna, the fact that when you introduce your podcast every week, that you say, or every other week, I suppose it is, but every time you say, we weren't made to do this alone. You speak the truth. We weren't made to do this alone. And that's not just pop culture talking. That isn't just quick psychology. That's deep theology. We were created to be in relationship because we were created by an eternal relationship. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. This is the way God reveals himself to us in the pages of the scripture. And it's mind-blowing, but I think it has deep implications. And because we weren't made to go it alone, that means that we can look at ourselves a little differently. I so often I hear people say, "Oh, I don't feel like I'm enough. I can't do enough. I'm not enough." And to that, I've heard some Christian teachers reply, "Well, no, you're not enough, but God is, or Jesus is, so that's fine." And I think they really mean well. I appreciate the sentiment behind that. But I would push back a little bit and say, actually, you are enough. In fact, you're plenty to be you. You're not enough to be everything, and you were never intended to be. You were always meant to be part of a whole, and all you have to do is play your part. And you can start from the knowledge that you're actually a beloved child of God, loved just because you exist. And you don't have to strive to be everyone and everything, because that's not the way God created you to be. He's created and called each of us to play our role. And it's only when we start thinking that we have to play every role that we end up thinking that we're not enough. And then it affects the way we look at other people too. We're able to look at our brothers and sisters as collaborators and as people with whom we are gifted to cooperate with rather than competitors. And it changes the way you see the world. If I don't have to compete with you, then I can connect with you. And that is a far better place to be.
So much better. Hey there, I'm going to interrupt for just a second to tell you about the Lovewell Escape. If you are a mom with young ones, from toddler through elementary years, and a weekend away with relaxing, laughing, and growing in sweet community with other moms sounds like a lovely idea, then the Lovewell Escape is just for you. Sarah Tenney is a licensed counselor in Ohio and the owner of Lovewell LLC. Lovewell is a small business here in Central Ohio where Sarah offers family coaching, counseling, workshops, and retreats. You can learn more about Sarah back on episode 25 of the podcast. The weekend of April 3rd through the 5th, women will escape together to a gorgeous 6,000 square foot home in Apple Valley, just 1 hour from Westerville. While enjoying the kid-free space and homemade meals, it will be a time to take deep breaths, have the joys and struggles of family normalized, and explore what it looks like to let go of Crazyville. Crazyville, as Sarah describes, is the moment when reasoning goes out the window and emotions take over. We often say things we regret and end up yelling. Practical strategies for change and meaningful conversation will allow the escape to be fun and encouraging, as well as a sweet opportunity for growth and community. To learn more, visit the Lovewell Escape website at lovewellcommunity.com. It is sure to touch your heart and impact your family for good. And now back to my conversation with Richella. I want to read here from your book. You wrote, "Perhaps the greatest irony is that we compare ourselves with others because we are seeking assurance. We are insecure about ourselves and we use comparison in a quest for security. But comparison doesn't provide assurance. It leaves us feeling either inferior or superior, not beloved and blessed."
Mm-hmm. I really think that's true. And in fact, we all know now, we all know that saying that comparison is the thief of joy, right? And it's usually attributed to Teddy Roosevelt. I wonder about that, but I was never able to find anyone else to attribute it to. But we know that it's true. I mean, sort of at a deep down level, we know that comparison is the thief of joy. But for a long time, I thought that must be true because comparison made me not appreciate what I have. But I've come to believe it's true, not for that reason, but because by its very nature, it's an isolating event. When we compare, we put ourselves on one side of the scale and we put everyone else on the other side of the scale.
Yeah.
And joy is found in connection with God and connection with people. And so I think comparison is the thief of joy. It robs us of our joy because it interrupts those vital connections. And that's the source of joy.
Yes, it is not me against everyone. It is me with everyone.
No.
And if I have a friend who is really excellent at something and I'm not, I can learn from her.
That's right. Exactly. And be blessed by her. I've thought in more recent years, I have come to be able to enjoy the gifts of others in ways that I never used to be able to. I have some remarkable friends, that's for sure. Like, for instance, I have one friend who she's brilliant. She has a PhD in nursing.
Wow.
So she has a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD in nursing. So she's brilliant, and she's caring, and she's thoughtful, and she's kind. And there are things she can do that for her are just as easy as falling off a log. And in recent years, I have been able to accept those gifts from her and just be so grateful that I know someone like that, instead of thinking, oh, why can't I be like that? And that's the way I used to always approach people. I didn't mean to, but it is what I was doing. I was observing the way people were. And instead of just glorying in the fact that they had blessed my life so much, instead, I was berating myself that I considered myself not as blessed. The truth is, we're all blessed, and we're blessed in different ways. And I think we're blessed in order to bless others. And there's so much freedom in coming to just be able to be glad for people for the ways they are blessed and letting them have that. And I'll be honest, Johanna, since this is Girls Talking Life, I honestly think that we women are some of the worst at this. I think we should be one another's greatest cheerleaders. And sometimes we end up being one another's greatest critics instead. And if someone is doing really, really well, we tend to feel as though that makes us look worse by comparison. And so we'll try to bring her down to make ourselves feel better. And I hate that. I think, and we do this, Christian women do this to one another. How sad is that? If we can learn to that we're linking arms and we're going forward together, there's nothing we can't do if we do it together. But as long as we feel like we're stuck in having to compete with one another, you get stuck in one-upsmanship, there's very little you can actually get done. So I think sometimes we're our own worst enemies.
You mentioned that in recent years, it's gotten easier for you. And I think that's true of me too. The more mature I get, both spiritually and otherwise, I feel like it's just easier to be more comfortable in your own skin.
Yes. Thank God. Right. I mean, none of us would be able to live if we continued in that sort of adolescent angst. Right.
Right.
And yet, I'll be honest and say, I thought that when my husband first pointed out that comparison thing, it was many years ago, and I thought it would just go away on its own as I matured. And what I realized was that for me, it was entrenched enough that I had to tend to it very, very intentionally, that it didn't come just naturally as a product of maturity. So if it's coming naturally for you as a product of maturity, then I am really, really happy for you. That's so good. But some of us, I think we all have particular things that we end up having to work on. just have to work on really diligently. And that's going to be different for each of us. But for those of us who really struggle with comparison, I think what I would like to say is there's hope. You really can. This is not a monster that has to take you down. You can make progress on this just like you can make progress on any other impediment.
What would you say to a woman who's listening and who's maybe waking up to the fact that this is something that she's struggling with? What would you say to her?
Well, first of all, I would say that I think it's absolutely crucial to get that distorted vision corrected. I think it's critical that you start with what you think about God, because there are some steps you can take. But if you start taking some steps, like if you're looking for tips and tricks, just do this, and you haven't sorted out yet the fact that you are the child of a God who loves you, then those steps can just lead you into a worse place instead of a better place. So I would strongly say that you need to get your thinking about God and yourself and other people adjusted a bit before you get started. But then once you've addressed that, I think there are some very practical things that you can do. And that's because I believe strongly, after having studied it for a long time, that comparison is a tool. It's a tool that can be used for good or can be used for ill. But using it for ill is something that we fall into doing habitually. Comparison is a habit, and bad habits can be replaced with good habits. Bad habits can be interrupted. The cycle of habitual behavior can be interrupted, and then bad habits can be replaced with good habits. And so I think there really are some things you can do. I suppose I really should here plug the book. I think the middle part of my book helps to correct the distorted vision. And then the last third of my book really talks about ways to correct it, steps to take. But here I'll just throw out one. I have discovered that people who struggle with comparison often are exhausted. They are trying so hard to measure up that they go to sleep at night berating themselves for what they didn't get done in the day. And then they wake up in the morning and they may set their alarm clock early to get out of bed and get to it because they feel like they've just got to work harder to measure up. So one of the first things I would suggest to people is that they need a little more rest. Rest can feel like just a luxury, but I also think that rest is a decision. I think rest is actually a radical act of trust. In order to rest, you have to lay down the burden of feeling that things are going to collapse without you. And you have to trust things to God, and to actually lie down and sleep as long as you need to sleep is one step in the right direction. And the second suggestion I would make comes hard on the heels of getting some rest, and that's not using your phone as an alarm clock. So many people do. I mean, our smartphones are such handy tools, right? And we make them into jacks of all trades. So we plug them in by our beds and we use them as alarm clocks. And so the instant we wake up in the morning, the first thing we do is to pick up our phones to turn off the alarm clock. But then that smartphone is such a tool for comparison. And there it is in our hands. So how many of us start the day by clicking straight to Instagram or Facebook? Instagram and Facebook are not the enemy. I think they're wonderful tools, but I don't think that's a good way to start the day. So the number 2 tip I give, if we're talking about tips and tricks, is buy a cheap alarm clock and plug your phone in the next room, and start the day not with seeing what your friends are up to on Instagram or Facebook, but instead starting the day, the way I like to start the day is with praying the Lord's Prayer, really asking God's kingdom to come and his will to be done in my life in a very, very nitty-gritty, granular way. I want God's will to be done in the way I look at myself, in the way I choose my tasks for the day, in the way that I relate to the people in my house, in the way I relate to people I work with. I want God's will to be done in all of those things. So that's how I start my day. Those are habits. Those are simply different habits. And that is what is required to defeat the habit of comparison, is by taking on new habits. And there are lots of them.
Yeah.
So I devote 3 chapters into sort of how to take on these changes. Yeah. But I think you have to start by correcting the distorted vision.
Richella, that is such good advice. And the rest, that could be for anyone, whether you're struggling with this or not. That is good advice.
Right? I now look at rest as a spiritual discipline.
I love
it's that. Something that I need to be able to do that. And I do think it's an act of trust. I've studied it. And I think that what prevents me from getting the rest I need tends to be lack of faith that God will provide, lack of faith that in the people that I live with, lack of trust that things are going to go okay if I take care of myself. So, oh boy, start there and see how you get on.
And then to your second point, I should mention that your book cover is a phone with a mirror on the front. And when you look into it, then you're seeing a distorted version or distorted image of yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm so grateful to the artist who came up with that idea. So the book cover is the front of a smartphone, but it's actually a reflective surface. So if you look at it, you see yourself, but what you see is a distorted image of yourself. And I think that's what comparison does to us. It shows us distorted images. And I'd like the idea of being able to see a clearer vision. And the thing I've discovered is that learning to see the way God sees makes things so much more beautiful. I think for a long time, I didn't want to see myself clearly because I feared that if I saw myself clearly, it would be even worse than I thought. But the opposite is true. Seeing myself more clearly makes me realize that it's so much better than I realized when I was always just comparing myself with others and struggling to understand. If we can just come to understand how deeply God loves us, it makes a difference.
Richella, I appreciate you boldly sharing your story with us. I appreciate you, even if it was kicking and screaming, I appreciate you writing it down in a book. It is so helpful, and your words are very wise.
Oh, thank you, Johanna. Thank you. I appreciate that. I like to think that there's some wisdom that I've gained through all this. And if I have, then boy, I sure would love to share it.
I want to shift gears a little and move into my favorite 5 segment. Yeah. This is where I ask my guest 5 things she is wearing or watching or doing that are her favorites right now. Richella, what do you have for us?
That's such a fun question, isn't it? And that's exactly what you do with your girlfriends. That's one of the reasons I like that, is because we do that with our girlfriends, right? So one thing I'm wearing right now, and I'm always wearing, no matter what time of year, is Burt's Bees lip balm.
Ah, yes.
If you've never tried it, I'm sure you can find it at your neighborhood drugstore or Target. But Burt's Bees is actually, the company is headquartered right here in Durham, North Carolina.
Oh, nice.
And I think it's just the best lip balm. It's made with beeswax. So it feels good on your lips, and it keeps your lips from getting terribly chapped. And they make one that has pomegranate in it. And so it's kind of tinted pink.
Okay.
And everybody in my family, all but one of us, loves Burt's Bees. The boys don't like the tinted pink kind.
Right.
But I like the tinted pink kind. So I'm wearing that. The second thing I'm wearing that I'm loving, because you and I are talking in the winter time, in the dead of winter, and I have come to absolutely love vests, like quilted vests. Yes. Or like one, I'm wearing one right now, and it's made by a British company called Barber. They make like lots of hunting and fishing gear. Okay. I think it's actually called a gillet, the way the British refer to it. But it's so wonderful to put on a quilted vest because you can put it on top of anything. And then your arms are free.
Right.
A lot of times if I put on a jacket, I feel a little constricted, but I can put the vest on and my arms are just as free. So I can do anything I need to do, but my body is warm. So I love that.
Well, Richella, I do have a jacket on right now, but I should probably tell you that I have a bit of a vest problem.
Oh, do you? Oh, so maybe I should not encourage you in the vest line.
Yeah, maybe not, but yes, I have a love of vests.
Aren't they that? Aren't they just wonderful? Yeah. So one thing I feel like I have to mention because it's really on my mind right now is a TV show, an HG TV show, Hometown. Have you ever watched it?
I think I've seen the previews for it, but I've never watched it.
Well, I love it because I spent part of my growing up in Mississippi. I went to high school in Clinton, Mississippi, and Hometown is a show about the revitalization of a small town in Mississippi, the town of Laurel, which is a town that we played in football when I was in high school. And my father was a traveling salesman, and Laurel was one of the towns that he visited. So I can remember going with my dad to Laurel for him to call on the drugstores there. And it's a town that had fallen on hard times, but this young couple, very young, Ben and Erin Napier, started working on houses in that little town. And now it's sort of like Chip and Joanna Gaines' Fixer Upper,
Okay.
but it's a little more down to earth. The last show that I watched, the house that they fixed up, the total budget for it was $75,000. So they're not doing $1 million renovations. These are like real houses in a real little town in Mississippi. And that little town is being revitalized. So it's a wonderful
That's
show.
so great.
So check it
Yeah.
out. Fourth thing I would say is something that I'm loving, but it's new to me. And so I'm just starting to love it. I got a new planner.
Oh.
And I'm not very good with planners. I'll have to say that. I wish I were more organized. This is a way in which I still struggle with comparing myself to others. I wish I were a more organized person. But this planner is made by a little company called Sacred Ordinary Days. I think it's a fairly new organization, but they have developed a planner that is built around the church calendar.
Oh.
And the church calendar is something that's fairly new to me. I grew up in a denomination that didn't have any use for the church calendar at all. So I'm still learning and growing. But this planner has room to list your appointments for every day, but it also has room for you to write some meditations, and it includes the scriptures from the daily office, as it's called, and folks from the Catholic Church or the Episcopal Church or whatever would be familiar with that term. But basically the scriptures that are designated for every day of the week as good scriptures to read. And so every day we'll include those scriptures. Just, it doesn't include the text of the scriptures, it just includes the references. So you kind of have a prompt as you're looking at your planner. Those are the scriptures to read and meditate on for the day. And
I like that.
Yeah, and it guides you through the season. So the the planner actually starts with the beginning of the church calendar, which is Advent. Mm-hmm. Instead of starting with January 1, you start with the Advent of the coming of Christ, and then Christmas. And so now we are in the season of, we just passed Epiphany, and we're leading up to the season of Lent, which will begin on Ash Wednesday. This is relatively new learning for me.
It is to me too.
Yeah. But there's some real richness there. I realize
I agree
that Christians through the ages their lives have been enriched. And I don't ever intend to become a slave to the church calendar, but I do love the idea of being enriched by it, realizing that Christians through the ages, many of them have really benefited from following this rhythm.
Yeah.
So that's a cool thing. And then the last thing is kind of a weird thing.
Well, let's hear it.
It's something that I use every single day. And it is I suppose you'd call it it's not a vitamin. I think it's a mineral. It's a supplement that I take. And it's magnesium. The one that I take, it's called magnesium lactate dietary supplement. And when it was first suggested to me, it was suggested because I was having trouble sleeping. And I heard the word magnesium, and that made me think of the laxative that my grandmother used to
Right.
milk of magnesia. And I thought, I don't need a laxative. But apparently a lot of us have a magnesium deficiency, and magnesium works on a certain kind of muscle, maybe smooth muscle, and it has a relaxing effect. And I guess that's why it works as a laxative. It relaxes those muscles.
Okay.
But a little bit of it can just work on anxiety, and it can help you to sleep.
Wow.
Because it just has now, I mean, I would talk with a doctor before you used it, and I don't take a ton of it. I just take a little bit at night, but it really does help me to sleep. It helps me to relax.
That's so interesting.
As I said, I'm all about sleeping.
Yes.
This magnesium has really, really helped me. So it's kind of a favorite thing right now.
Okay. That is really important. Yeah. If you're having trouble with that.
And if you're struggling with sleep, might be worth asking about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richella. Thank you for sharing.
Very unusual list of 5 favorite things.
That is great. I love to hear all of the little things that help make people's lives go better.
Yeah.
Richella, it has been a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to talk with you, Johanna. Thank you for the work you're doing with this podcast. I appreciate your voice and how you sound like a girlfriend, which is wonderful. You just sound like the kind of person that people want to talk with. That's a gift. So thank you for that.
You're so sweet. Thank you for saying that. And I appreciate your time. I'm so glad that you got to come on and chat with us and tell us about your book and just boldly share your story and what God has been teaching you. Can you tell us where we can find your book, Mythical Me?
Oh, sure. Mythical Me is available at Amazon and at Barnes & Noble. I just found out that's available at Target.com.
Excellent.
Or at Christian book distributors. Or it's available through InterVarsity Press's website. You can actually order it directly from the publisher if you like. So sort of wherever books are sold, I guess.
Okay.
And I would love to, if anybody has any questions or would like to contact me, I'd love to connect with people. I'm on Instagram at Richella Parham, and same for Twitter. And I'm on Facebook, Richella Parsons Parham. So I'm kind of all over the World Wide Webs. Also, I have a blog that I've had forever and ever called Imparting Grace. So impartinggrace.com. Love to connect with people. I can tell them more about my magnesium.
Great. Thank you so much, Richella.
Thank you, Yolanda.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Richella is so wise and lovely, and I know you found value in her words. Let's work on lifting our sisters up and appreciating their strengths. And whether comparison is your thing or not, I think Richella does a fabulous job of pointing us in the right direction to correct whatever our distorted vision might be. Richella was so kind to give me an extra copy of her book to give away, so be sure to find me on Instagram at Girls Talking Life and watch for the giveaway later this week. And if you're not feeling lucky, grab her book, Mythical Me, wherever books are sold. If you like what you're hearing here on the show, I would love for you to rate and review it on iTunes or tell a friend about it this week. I would just love for more women to be encouraged by the stories of my guests. Friends, don't let the conversation stop when the show is over. Share your stories and start your own conversations with the girls in your life. I'll see you back here in 2 weeks. Thanks for tuning in.